Good day to you all. Thank you so much for inviting me to make a small contribution to the discussions that you will be having today and hopefully over a long time after today. Soybeans are an absolutely wonderful crop, both for humans and for animals alike, and for farmers because they are wonderful to grow in a rotation with other crops. Some of you might know me and know that really what I know about is not soybeans. I've been in farmer development for many years, and it has been a passion of mine for many years, and it is still a passion of mine, and I really hope to be able to share some thoughts on that with you today. And I really think that it was in that light that I was invited, and certainly not because I know anything about soybeans. Over many years I was with Grain SA with the farmer development program there, and we tried to get small farmers to grow soybeans on a small scale for household use. And I regret to say that I don't think it was successful, in that particularly poor people who are at the subsistence level, what they grow is what they know and what they eat. And as we know, a soybean isn't something that you pick and eat like that. You need to process it. And so we found there was a reluctance amongst the farmers to actually put their physical effort into growing soybeans. But we did also, with money from the Oil and Protein Seeds Development Trust, help somebody to put up what they call a soya cow, a little factory that turns soya beans into soya juice. Perhaps we shouldn't call it milk because it doesn't taste like milk, which you then can make yogurt or flavored drinks and so on. And it was successful, and people liked it. There was a little school down there, and the grade 3 pupils, we weighed them every month, every week for a month, and the children gained weight. They looked forward to playtime, they looked forward to having the yogurt and the soya milk. But when they had to buy it, then nobody bought it. And unfortunately, it would have been ideal to get into the school feeding schemes. But I think you perhaps needed to be better connected to be able to be part of the tender system to getting into the feeding schemes. So we weren't able to do that. I would like somebody, let me put it that way, to put effort into encouraging people to eat soya. It's a wonderful source of protein, and in our country where there are a lot of poor people, it is a very, very good alternative to put into people's diets. But we need to show them, expose them, encourage them, tell them more about the benefits of eating soya, let them know what products have soya in them, and help to get that industry more known to them. And I think once we could get to that point where people knew it and liked it, then we would have more success in getting the small farmers to grow it. So what I would like to talk to you more about today is the more commercial individual black farmers, and that we should encourage them to bring soya beans as a crop rotation into their other cropping. A lot of them grow only maize, and we have problems with the monoculture. So if we could get the farmers to grow more soya beans in a crop rotation, I think that would be great. And I'd like to share some thoughts with you today about the challenges that we're facing and what we're trying to achieve. When we come to the more sustainable and more commercial farmers, we understand the need for a good crop rotation. Farmers, unfortunately, in South Africa, one of their major problems, which we'll discuss later, is the access to funding. And where the funding is often dictates what crop they plant. So if farmers, for example, can get money to grow sunflowers, they plant sunflowers year on year on year until they run into problems. Or if they get funding for non-GMO maize, they grow non-GMO maize year after year after year until they run into problems there. So we need to get the farmers into a position to be able to have a really good crop rotation system, that we have soil health, disease control, and so on. Of course, soyas remain a challenge to our farmers because of the harvesting. I equate it to needing to have a midwife ready and waiting, because when it's the soybean time to be harvested, the midwife needs to be there to get it off the land. So that's one of the challenges that we face in terms of growing soya. But otherwise, it's the most wonderful crop to use in a rotation. What we've been aiming at for so many years now, and perhaps I should mention that it was NOPO that started farmer development as we know it now, back in 1998 in Zeerust. So the oilseeds industry has really been a leader in the field of farmer development. And what are we aiming at? We want to see transformation in the sector. We want to see it being an inclusive sector. Currently, we seem to have streams where we have white commercial farmers belonging to one organization and black commercial farmers perhaps belonging to another. And we don't see to be speaking with one voice when in fact we are facing the same challenges and we have the same frustrations as well as the joys. We want to see sustainable and appropriate land use, the right crop grown in the right rotation in the right place. It is essential. And then, of course, our rural areas, they need to be prosperous. Our small towns are dying, and they're dying because our sector isn't developing as it should. We want to see competent and committed farmers. We don't want to see people who farm by proxy that have businesses far away. You can't invest in people like that because they're not there for you to teach them. The land tenure and secure land tenure. I don't believe that we should be trying to change the land tenure systems in the former homelands and the deep rural areas. All people need is secure tenure. So whether it's a PTO or a long-term lease or a title deed, great, doesn't really matter as long as they have security there. And then our successful farmers need to practice good agronomic practices, which of course include crop rotations, as I've been mentioning. They need to have access to mechanization at the right time, working to the correct specs at affordable prices. It is incredibly important, the mechanization aspect in terms of the crop farming. Access to production loans, production inputs, good quality ones. Access to markets. In most of the areas where crops are grown traditionally, that isn't a problem. But in some of our areas is a problem. So we have to have access to markets. We need to have a safe and secure environment. Currently, people in the rural areas don't feel safe. It's people of all colour. It's big farmers and it's small farmers, and it needs to be addressed for us. Infrastructure, storage facilities, good roads. These are not always possible in areas where you're trying to encourage development. And then a safety net for acts of God. Sometimes you get a flood or a drought or a fire, late frost. And if we could have some insurance for that, would be really wonderful. Who's funding the development? I was with Grain South Africa, I think for 15 years in farmer development, and just through the programs that we were doing there, we spent just under R1 billion of donor money. Now, I know these days when we hear all of the corruption, we hear so many big numbers, but to my mind, R1 billion still remains a large amount of money. And that money was only through the program that I was involved in. What about all the other programs? So there are vast sums of money being put into development, and I don't believe that we are getting the results that we should be. The government is involved, obviously, Department of Land Affairs and Agriculture, in terms of land. They give land or allocate land, and then sometimes they give mechanization or they give money for mechanization. They have various stimulus packages that give farmers basically everything they need for a short while. And that's important, but that needs to be linked to other aspects. Then we have the ARC and its affiliates. The ARC offers laboratory services. I know they've given seed for certain crops. They have an extension service that they offer. I forgot to mention that agriculture also has an extension service, although quite often the people are very educated but not very experienced. And then, of course, the grain trusts, the Oil and Protein Seeds Development Trust, the Maize Trust, Winter Cereals Trust, the Sorghum Trust. I know they have given large sums of money for development of their particular commodities, and that has made a lot of development possible. SACTA has been recently providing zero interest rate loans for farmers to grow, particularly soya beans, but also the likes of canola and other crops in a rotation, which is a wonderful help for the farmers. The commercial banks are actually funding development and that they pay for mentoring and things like that. The input supply companies have paid for a lot of on-farm support and mentoring. The commodity organizations themselves put of their own money into the development, a lot of commodities, not only the grains. The agricultural businesses, most of them have a section to do farmer development and they're carrying those costs themselves. Traders are involved and the actual buyers of the commodity who want to use that commodity. So these are all the people that have been paying for development over the years. But a lot of it is, if I could say, disjointed. Everybody doing a little bit on their own. And who else is involved? Those aren't the only people that are involved. Those are the people giving the money. But then they're implementing agencies. Some of the commodity organizations have their own programs that are working with the farmers and developing them. Then you have NGOs and also profit-driven companies that sometimes haven't been quite as good as they could have been in terms of making sure that it's the farmer that benefits. And of course, I believe that if we say we're doing development, it must be the farmer that is benefiting. The input supply companies are very kind in helping the farmers, giving them good prices, as well as offering in-field services and so on to increase the knowledge of the farmers. And then the financial institutions, in terms of loans, farmers get loans. Of course, we need a lot more than we're getting, but they're there. And then the agri-businesses, they are suppliers of inputs, they give loans, they provide markets, and they have mentoring as well. So these are the people that are more involved actually in what's happening on the ground and not only giving the money. Now, the challenges that are facing the farmers, I'm sad to say that although I've been involved in the sector probably for 20 years now, many of these challenges are the same challenges that we were dealing with when I started. They haven't been addressed. We haven't managed to really crack the nut to get it to work. The issue of secure land tenure. If you have a long-term lease or you've got a title deed, you secure. But we find in some of the former homeland areas that if a farmer's doing well, the next year they don't get that land. Somebody else gets given that land and they start again having to do soil correction and so on. The production loan financing must be the biggest challenge that we're facing. The farmers do not qualify for production loans. And you can understand, the banks and the agribusinesses and so on, they are lending out somebody else's money. And if there's a risk, they don't want to do it, and we can understand that. But on the other hand, if we're going to get the farmers being productive, we have to have money. So how are we going to overcome that? And then something that to this day, in fact, only last week, I was looking at the results of soil sampling. Many of the soils have a very, very low pH, and they have low levels of phosphate. And it costs really a lot of money to correct that. Now, you can maintain it, out of your normal enterprise budget, but to actually do the corrections might cost in excess of 4,000 or 5,000 rand a hectare in one season. And the farmers simply don't have the money to do that. And if you don't correct that, you're not going to get the yields on the other side. Access to modern production inputs. Possibly a lot of you who are hearing me speak would think, but surely not. Everybody has access to that. But it's not like that. In the areas where crop farming wasn't practiced commercially, the farmers can't access the most modern inputs, the hybrid seeds, the good chemicals that they need, commercial fertilizers, small packs of the various chemicals. Everything comes in big drums and it's difficult for them to use. Although I'm not talking about the 1 hectare farmers here, we're talking about the more commercial farmers. Knowledge and skills, of course, as you know, farming is something that for most people goes from one generation to the next, and you really don't know where you learned what you know. It's just come with you and been part of you. And to impart that to people takes a long time. And it's a very, very broad knowledge that you need. It's not only about the soil, it's not only about the crops, it's about mechanization, it's about management, it's about money and running your business, reading the markets, understanding marketing. It's complex, and that still needs to be addressed. The mechanization I mentioned briefly. When you are cropping, it's critical that you do the right thing at the right time. There's just a little window in which everything is spot on for you to be able to plant. And if you're waiting for a contractor to come and he comes late, you've lost the opportunity to have a good crop. Or if your own equipment is breaking down all the time, you lose that opportunity. So the mechanization is a big factor in the challenges that we face. Access to storage and markets. This is such a funny one because in areas where people don't produce traditionally, there's no storage. But in areas where they do produce traditionally, when you have a good year, everything's full. And they can't get their maize into the silos or their soyas into the silos, so they're storing them in dams. And as you're aware, in some areas, it's really not safe to do on-farm storage because the local people are hungry and they're needy, and so you lose a lot like that. And then the statutory requirements, the VAT, the tax, the UIF, the workman's compensation, those are things that farmers struggle with out there. Who helps them with that? Who's giving them good advice? Who's giving them financial statements that they can interpret their business, not just for tax compliance, but to make good business decisions? So these are all the things really that I feel we need to address if we're going to have long-term success in crop production. Now, is there a workable solution, and do we have a plan? I've thought about it for so long, and yes, I do believe there is a solution. And I believe part of the solution is in an enormous collaboration. Nobody can do this alone. We need to work together to do this. What I've seen in the different programs is farmers are recycled. Now he's with that agribusiness, then you see him popping up with that bank, then you see him with that commodity organization, and all the time it's the same farmer, but he's moving from one place to the other, and the others don't have a record of it. So I think we need to have a non-profit organization that does facilitation, monitoring, and evaluation. But this organization must not implement themselves, because then it immediately puts them in conflict and competition with the other implementing agents. So you need to have somebody that is concerned for the welfare of the entire section. And then if we could have this collaboration so that we can identify suitable farmers on existing land. My feeling is if we could get the existing land into good use, then we'll start talking about new land. Because all the time there's this threat of the expropriation with or without compensation. It doesn't help to give a farmer land if he doesn't know how to use it and he hasn't got the means. So let's get the farmers that are already there up and running and properly on their feet, that we can walk away from them. Then we need to prepare a funded, detailed business plan for 5 years, not for one season, for one crop, but for a 5-year plan at least. And then if we could mobilize grant funding as well as loan funding. For example, I mentioned the mechanization, it's expensive, or the soil corrections, the farmer can't do it. If we could say to government, stop handing out seed, just give us money for lime and for phosphates, then we can really get those people to a position where they can farm. Instead of which, the government's programs are a bit of this here and a bit of that there, without really being able to see the impact. If we could ensure competent and experienced mentoring on the farms, people that are really dedicated to doing that, and that we don't have the crossing over now. Now you've got a farmer who plants 50 hectares of this crop funded by that person, mentored by Mr. X. On that same farm, that farmer's planting 50 hectares of something else, using somebody else's money and being being mentored by someone else. And so we go, that sometimes you've even got 3 or 4 different mentors and different financiers on the same farm in the same season. It doesn't make any sense to do it like that. And we need to have a database of the farmers so that we can see how are they actually progressing. Not just a database of his name and number, but that we can see everything about that farmer and help him to become more sustainable. The business plan, I believe, should have information about the soil and the soil status. We should have a 5-year crop rotation plan. We need to have at least a 5-year funding plan for the mechanization, that we could actually borrow the money and pay it off over 5 years, because we know that the farmer has funding for 5 years. And then input insurance to safeguard against acts of God, the training and mentoring, and market access for the farmer. So if we could combine our efforts, and I'm not for a moment saying that people will give up on their independence, but if we could collaborate better and have a central system of recording it, then we would know how we're progressing. The database and web reporting is something that I really think is critical, and more critical about just having a database is to be sure that the information that you have on it is correct and is updated. Otherwise, it's useless. And of course, anything that we do these days has to be fully POPIA compliant, because people's information needs to be protected. But we need to record the interactions with the farmers so that we can see what training has he had or her had, what on-farm support, what have they learned about, so that we don't tick the box of saying we're doing training, but the same farmer does a financial management course every year for the next 3 years and have never done courses on other more practical aspects perhaps. And then in terms of storing the farmer's information, personal information about the farmer, his contact details and so on, information about the soil and his land tenure, because it's nice to track that the farmer was on leased land, he's now bought a farm, he's perhaps bought a second farm. Then we can start saying, but look at the successes. Now we keep saying, oh look, all the land reform projects have failed, because we don't have information on those that haven't failed. We need information about the mechanization. We need to know what tractors have you got, what kilowatts, what trailed implements have you got, rippers, discs, planters, what sort of a planter, what sort of a sprayer, and so on. A record of the crops he's produced over the period. So when you go to a financier, you can say, but look at this chap's track record over the last 3 years. Look at the crops he's produced. Look at the loans. They might have been interest-free. The loans that he managed to borrow and repay. Please take him on as your client. We have the records to support him. His livestock. We need to know, how many animals has he got? Is he growing? Is that business paying for him? And then, of course, all the relevant documentation about him, his VAT registration number and things that you need all the time when you're helping a farmer with this or that. So if we could have this information housed separately, kept, the information of all the different people should be housed there, but kept separately. So if you're a commodity organization doing development, your information is housed there, but the other person can't see your information. Somebody else that's accessing the database from their side, they only see their information, but it is stored there. And if it's a farmer that you're taking over from someone else, you can take him with his records so we can keep track of what is happening. So I really believe that if we agreed to collaborate and work together, and we got government to help us, and we could have a non-profit organization monitoring and supporting, we could really make an enormous difference in this, that we know not only do we have to do it, that we want to do. So to you today, people from the Oil and Protein Seeds Development Trust and the Oilseeds Advisory Committee, your predecessors, NOPO, from years and years ago, thank you for being leaders in this industry. Thank you for putting money and effort into farmer development and making it possible to give people hope, to help people to use the land that they have, and to move us towards a more united sector and to give our country the hope we need so badly. Thank you so much.